All right, so where we left off in the last video was we made the base shape of our avocado. Now we're going to make multiple parts that fit to the avocado, and we're going to cut up the avocado using the Boolean modifier. Now, this part is going to be the finale of the modeling portion of this tutorial. Then we're going to get into slicing software. But I'm going to start off kind of slow. It's the trickiest part, so we'll start slow and then we'll speed up at the end. To start off with, you don't have to follow along with this next part. I'm just going to give an overview of the Boolean modifier. I'm going to move our objects out of the way, and then I'm going to add a sphere, and I'm going to move it along the x-axis 0.5 units, and then duplicate it and move it another unit. So now we have these two spheres. And you can sort of view this as a three-dimensional Venn diagram. So you have one topic, you have another topic, and they have a little bit of overlap, some common ground. And when it comes to the Boolean modifier, I like to think of the object that we're cutting as the cookie dough, and then the object that we're using to cut as the cookie cutter. So I'm going to treat this sphere on the left as our cookie dough, and on the right as the cookie cutter. So I'm going to first select my cookie dough, and then the first step to adding a Boolean modifier is going down here to the modifier properties tab, which is this blue wrench, and then saying add modifier Boolean. And by default, it's a difference modifier, which is what I want to show you first. And it's going to always ask us what is the cookie cutter, right? We know the dough, what is the cutter? So I'm going to grab this eyedropper tool under object and then select the second sphere as the cookie cutter. And then I'm going to come down here to the drop down and say apply, and then move the cookie cutter out of the way. So you'll notice that our cookie dough kind of has a bite taken out of it. What happened was that we took the shape of our cookie cutter and cut it out of our cookie dough. So I'm going to undo a little bit so that we get our Boolean modifier back and switch from difference to union. So union will be like kind of the entirety of the Venn diagram. And if we move our cookie cutter out of the way, well, it's not really a cutter anymore. It's more like adding to the object. And if we want to really bring it back to a cookie cutter analogy, it's sort of like we took our cookie dough, we stuck a cookie cutter in there, and then we just left it there, and then we put the baking sheet in the oven, and now we have melted plastic in our, it's not a perfect analogy, but it helps me remember sometimes. So then I'm going to undo one more time. That was the union. It's adding the object, and then finally we have the intersect. And honestly, I have never really found a use for intersect, but maybe you will. If we move the cookie cutter out of the way, we can see this is just the overlap section of our Venn diagram. And how it relates to cookies, I have no idea. But that is the overview of the Boolean modifier. So I'm going to delete these. And then I want to be working with my avocado again. So I'm going to say Alt or Option G to reset the movement. And then our image is in the way, so I'm going to move that back on the y-axis. And now let's talk about how to cut the avocado. So the first step in doing this is adding our cookie cutter. In this case, it's going to be a cube. And I could just work with this cube, but for the sake of best practices, I'm going to open the N menu, grab this, change the dimensions to 1, reset the scale by hitting Command A, applying scale. I say reset, I think I mean to say apply scale. So now we're working with a 1 millimeter cube, and if we scale it up, it's going to be the exact size that we want it to be in millimeters. And I'm going to scale this up to 100 millimeters. I should say, now you can follow along with this part. This is, back to shaping the avocado. So we've added this cube, we've scaled it up, and it's all around our avocado, but I want it to be halfway through our avocado. So I'm going to move it along the y-axis, and I'm going to say 100 units. Oh, that's twice as far, actually. Let's say 50. That's 100. So it's GX50, enter. So now you can see it's halfway through our avocado. Again, that was did I say GX? I meant GY 50, enter. All right, so that's going to move along the y-axis 50 units, enter. So now we have our avocado, we have the cookie cutter, and we want to start cutting. So I'm going to grab the cookie dough, which is the avocado. I'm going to go down here to the blue wrench, the add modifiers tab, and then I'm going to add modifier Boolean. Now you might have already noticed that there is a modifier here, and that is actually the subsurf modifier that we added in the last video to smooth out our cube. And if we try adding our Boolean modifier and then applying it right away, well, let's first select our cookie cutter, which is our cube, and then try applying the Boolean modifier. Well, that is a shape that we don't want at all. So what's up with that? If we hit tab to go into edit mode, what it did was actually apply the Boolean modifier based on this simple cube shape with the loop cuts, but we really want it to apply to the curved shape. So I'm going to undo here so that we get both of our modifiers back, and then first apply the subsurf. And before I apply the Boolean, let me just show you what it looks like in edit mode. So now we have all these new faces. This is what the subsurf did. It added all these faces to make a smooth object. And so now we're truly working with this complex object rather than like a preview of the complex object. So then we exit edit mode and apply the Boolean modifier. And there we go. That is what we want. Now I'm going to move the cookie cutter out of the way just by saying GZ, and I can just move it way down so that it's out of the way, but we can grab it later if we want to. So now we have our avocado that's been cut in half. And now let's start working on the peel of the avocado. So in order to do this, I'm going to duplicate this base shape by saying Shift D, and then I can move it around with my mouse, but I'm going to right click so that it doesn't follow my mouse. And then I'm going to go into object properties, and I want to scale it up so that it kind of wraps around the, let's say the green part of the avocado, like the green creamy part is actually called the flesh. So I'm going to refer to this first cube as the flesh and rename it. And then the second cube, the selection looks no different because they're in the exact same spot. I'm going to say cube 02 is the peel. So now we're able to differentiate our objects. So we want the peel to wrap around the flesh, right? So let's grab the peel and then let's scale it up. But let's start thinking about dimensions before we do. So we want this peel to be a couple millimeters in thickness, and we also want a little bit of a gap between the flesh and the peel, because if it's too close, it's not quite gonna fit. We have to think about the physical parts of this because we're 3D printing, right? So I want a 1 millimeter gap and I want a 2 millimeter thickness. So you might be thinking, well, okay, so we increase the size by 3 millimeters. We're actually going to increase the size by 6 millimeters, and I'll explain why in a second. So I'm going to grab the peel, go to scale, and say 76. So now it's 6 millimeters bigger. And then I'm going to grab the flesh and scale it up by 2 millimeters, so 72. And you might be thinking again, like, why 2? Why you said 1 millimeter gap? Why not increase it by 1? It's actually because we want a 1 millimeter gap on each side, and then a 2 millimeter thickness on each side. So we have to double both of those numbers. So now we have our peel and we have our flesh ready to like cut out the peel. But we have some problems, and one of them is that if we move the camera around, you'll notice this kind of graphical bug. I'm actually going to go out of X-ray vision mode, and you'll see that this face looks really weird. Well, the reason for that is because these two faces are existing on the same plane. They are going the same direction and they're touching, which means they're coplanar. So in order to change this, I should say, if we try to apply the Boolean modifier with coplanar faces, we're probably going to get problems. So in order to fix this, we're going to move the flesh forward, but by such a tiny amount that we probably won't even notice. So I'm going to say G, Y, and then I'm going to say 0.001, right? So it moved, but it moved such that, you know, we still have this graphical bug, but at least we know they're not exactly touching. The two faces are not touching. And then we can verify this by constraining our camera on the x-axis and then zooming way in, like way in. And you'll notice that these two objects are actually separated by just a tiny bit right there. So cool. We have our two objects. They're ready to cut. So I'm going to grab my cookie dough, which in this case is the peel, and then go to the blue wrench, add modifier, Boolean, and difference is what we want. We want to be cutting out of. And then we want to select our cookie cutter, which is our flesh. And I'm just going to select it up here in the menu. And if we apply, then we have, let's move our cookie cutter out of the way. We have a hollow shape, which is exactly what we wanted. Now, there's one thing, and that's we resized the flesh. We want to change it back to 70 millimeters instead of 72. So perfect. We have this little gap in between like we wanted. We have a 2 millimeter thickness on our peel. And there is one more thing we want to add, which is the pit of the avocado, the big old seed in the middle here. And you have all the tools and the knowledge to do this at this point, so I'm going to go through this part quite a bit faster. First, I'm going to add a cube. It's going to show up in the center. I'm going to hit N. I'm going to change the dimensions to 1. I'm going to reset the scale. I'm going to make sure I'm in X-ray vision mode, constrain my camera on the Y-axis, scale it up, and I want it to kind of match the size, the top and bottom of my reference image. So I'm going to move this down with a GZ, scale it up again, and that's pretty good. That's already the shape or the size that I want. And then I'm going to, let's get a better look at it. I'm going to hit Command 5 to round it out. I'm going to enter edit mode. I'm going to hit Command R to add a loop cut. And this time it's just going to be 1 loop cut instead of 5. I'm going to right click so it doesn't follow my mouse. And I'm going to get back into X-ray vision mode. I'm going to grab the top. I'm going to scale it down so it's a little bit pointy. Scale the bottom down a little bit. That looks pretty good. And then, yeah, that already is the shape of the pit that I want. So in like less than a minute, we've already created a new object. Now let's start thinking about how to cut it out. Now, I scaled it up informally. I didn't use precise dimensions. So this is going to be kind of a hard number to work with if I start rescaling and setting it back down. So instead of 31, I'm going to say 30 for all these scale dimensions. And we want to think about, so we're cutting out again, so we want a little bit of a gap, but this is a much smaller object. So I think we can get away with a gap of 0.25 millimeters, so just 1/4 of a millimeter. So we're going to increase the size of our object by 0.5 millimeters. So again, that's 1/4 of a millimeter on each side, so it's going to be 30.5. All right, and then we're going to grab our cookie dough, which in this case is the flesh of the avocado, and then say add modifier Boolean difference, and then select the pit of the avocado. And then I'm going to say apply. And then if we scale this back down, we still have a subsurf modifier that we didn't apply. We can go ahead and apply that now if we want to. and then come back to the object properties and scale it back down to 30. There we go. So we have a little bit of a gap here, and we have our pit that's going to fit into the flesh of the avocado. Great. If we want to, we could go to materials here, and then I'm going to go into material viewport shading mode, and then add a new material. And I've grabbed the peel here, and the peel, I want that to be black. So I'm just going to drag this down. And this isn't going to affect our print at all. It just kind of helps us with understanding which object we're working with. I'm going to make that one kind of greenish. That looks good. And then I'm going to make this one kind of brownish, kind of an orange red, and then pull that down. There we go. So now we have our 3 objects that are 3 different colors, and look how much clearer that is in Blender. All right, so if you got this far, pat yourself on the back. You've concluded the modeling portion of this Blender tutorial. In the next part, we're going to start exporting and slicing and getting ready for 3D printing. We're going to use the software called Ultimaker Kira. If you already have it, you're good to go. But if not, you can download that right now before the next video starts, and I'll see you in the next one. Thank you for watching.